All right, hey everybody, Mr. Harvey here. Let's rock and roll on chapter 7, part 2, lecture 2. Here we go. So we're going to be talking today a little bit about the family structure. We're going to talk a little bit about marriage and about what families socially were like before the industrial, agricultural revolution, the French Revolution, the revolutions of 1848, all the revolutions that we're going to talk about, crazy revolutions that we're going to talk about. Now, before the industrial and agricultural revolutions, the family was the basic unit of production and consumption in pre-industrial Europe. Somebody just texted me. What does my sister need? Never mind. All right. Uh, the family was the basic unit of production and consumption in pre-industrial Europe. Families produced and consumed what they produced, if that makes sense. Let me give you an example. I'm a farmer. I produce potatoes. I therefore produce our food. I don't go to Whole Foods or Vons. I make my own food. I currently today don't go to Whole Foods. Why? I don't want to buy quinoa for $100. That's insane. Or a $50 smoothie. You've got to be kidding me. Okay, super expensive. Not stoked. All right. Families did not go to the grocery store. They made their own stuff. They did not go to Macy's or they did not go to Lacoste outlets or whatever outlets. They would make their own clothes. They produced and they consumed what they produced. Okay, that's going to change. We're going to see a big change in the Industrial Revolution. All right, let's talk really quickly about how the households were socially constructed. Okay, you had the nuclear family in Western Europe, and keep in mind we're going to see a big contrast from Eastern Europe. All right, the nuclear family, married couple, children. Okay, in the household, and we see servants. Remember, Western European peasants, they're peasants. They're still poor, but they're not as poor as Eastern European serfs, and they're not as oppressed. All right, they're oppressed, but they're not as oppressed. All right, and they don't have as bad as living conditions. All right, these households married a little bit later, but we will see less arranged and economically based marriages. Well, let's think about, remember, Protestantism, married for love, indispensable companions. All right, and we will see servants in these households. Servants were not considered like, oh, a servant, you're below me. No, servants were actually considered very vital to the household, important. Uh, if they were paid a wage, it was really small, but typically the wages that servants were given was, free rent. Here's a room, you don't have to pay any rent. Just help out around the house, cooking, cleaning, childcare, or helping out on the farm, whatever is asked of them. Okay, and they were considered, socially part of the family. Eastern Europe, way different. Okay, and remember, you got to keep in mind. You could see a question on the AP test about the differences between the East and the West. Marriages often arranged, economically based. Well, think about it. Okay, uh, Eastern Europe is not only behind. Remember, the Renaissance didn't get to that area. Protestant Reformation didn't get to that area. Eastern European households were absolutely behind. Okay, you had a lot of family living in these households. Think about it. Why? Poor, didn't have a lot of family members probably couldn't afford to have their own place, so they're gonna have to stay at one place, and you would see multiple generations, grandpa, grandma, aunts, uncles, living in maybe a small little space. And also we see landlords. Remember they had a lot of control over their peasants, over the serfs, and they will, they needed labor to work the farm, so they will also influence families and keep families closer together so they can watch over them and control their lives to work their farms. Let's talk a little bit about marriage. All right. Some European men and women never married, and that was really suspicious. Okay, that was a very suspicious thing. Remember, marriage is defined between a man and a woman. People are expected to define, were expected to be married, and that was how marriage was defined. And people were expected to do that, and if they didn't do that, that was sketchy. Especially for women. Women were expected to get older, get married, raise kids, etc., etc. Um, and any woman who was not married, that was, remember, what are they called? Well, they could be considered a witch. That could be considered really sketchy. If you've ever read Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, and you ever read that in English class with Valdez or any of your English teachers, um, that gives you a really good glimpse into the social anxiety of unmarried women and women really working and trying to get, a suitor and get married. And it caused a lot of anxiety among women. Uh, Living alone was almost impossible, viewed with suspicion. If a man or a woman uh, lived alone, that was very suspicious, especially for women. Uh, all members of the household worked. Work products went to family, not the individual. If you had food, it went to everybody. It didn't go to just dad and he ate all the food while everyone, starved. It's not how it worked. Farming was the major occupation, but we do see people have side jobs. Okay, some family members might work in town. The younger sons, if they're not working on the farm, they might go apprentice somewhere and send money home. Uh, in town and urban areas, we see a specific structure, especially among skilled artisans. Typically, the father was the tradesman. Let's think, for example, like a shoemaker. The father was the chief artisan. He would make shoes. The wife would probably work at the business and sell the shoes, sell the wares or the goods, and the children would learn their separate trade. Typically, the son would follow in the footsteps of the father, and the daughters would follow in the steps of the wives. And in Western Europe, in Eastern Europe as well, and Europe all around, because uh, you know uh, the economy was so patriarchal, and men were typically the head of the family economically. If the men died or the father died, that was a disaster. Um, uh, fam, that was it, because they had the skill. They were in charge, and we would see a lot of families go onto the streets and become beggars and poor. If the father died, they'd lose a lot of money. Okay, children, and we're going to talk a little bit about children. Children, and being a kid is going to change a lot in Europe when the rest of Europe changes. Okay, um, and we're going to talk about that. But pre-industrial Europe, kids typically lived with their parents until they were teens. Okay, then they left to work. They could work inside the home. Many of them will work outside the home because they could earn more money. And we do see this idea of neo-localism and kids, moving away from home, becoming an apprentice for like a carpenter or somewhere in a town, or maybe working on another farm, and working away from home and then sending their wages back. Okay, um, women's lives were typically determined to, be a wife. They were expected to be a wife, to maintain a household, cook, clean, take care of the kids. And marriage was, even though people are still going to marry for love, marriage, you still need to get married out of necessity economically. Okay, all the single ladies, it's not gonna work in pre-industrial European history. In pre-industrial, uh, it's just not going to happen. The dominant concern for families in the 18th century is going to be food. All right, and that's going to be their primary source of birth control. Families are not going to have kids if they don't have enough food, because babies eat a lot, babies sleep a lot, babies poop a lot, babies are an economic hardship. Okay, and that's going to be they're going to limit the number of people are going to limit the number of kids they have because they simply can't afford to. And that kind of leads into our next couple slides. Okay, um, childbirth during this time, very dangerous. They don't have modern medicine, and we talked a little bit about childbirth from an evolutionary standpoint, um, but childbirth, very dangerous. Didn't have modern medicine, didn't have painkillers and whatnot. Childbirth is a very physically and mentally, psychologically, exhausting and dangerous endeavor, and very dangerous for both mother and child. The wet nursing industry during the 18th century was very much alive and well. Uh, Being a full-time mom was really difficult, especially for the peasants, middle class, upper class. Not necessarily for the upper class and middle class, but definitely for the lower class. Um, and you see a full-on wet nursing industry of where you would have women breastfeed the children of other mothers. Typically, what were those other mothers doing? They were working. They didn't have time to, have baby in one hand and be farming in the other. It just didn't work out that way. Um, uh, Having a child was an economic hardship, okay? And we will see some infanticide, the babies being abandoned, left to die, because why? Households sometimes didn't have the money, couldn't feed them, and the biggest reason of why we see infanticide is poverty. Okay, um, we will see that start to change, and this is what's kind of cool about the Enlightenment. And this is what's kind of cool about society changing is we're going to see with changing ideas with science, politics, etc., economics, etc. We're going to see changing ideas concerning children, okay, and we're going to start seeing changing ideas concerning mental health. We're going to start seeing the first orphanages. We'll see social programs. Okay, one of the first social programs is actually foundling hospitals established for abandoned kids, usually victims of poverty or illegitimacy, okay, being born out of wedlock, okay? And we're going to see a new interest to preserve the lives of children, okay? And here are a couple examples of some of the first foundling hospitals, all right? We're going to see with the Enlightenment different styles of parenting. Parenting is going to change. And I talked with my students. I had some strict parents, man. I got yelled at. I got in trouble a lot. And prior to the 18th centuries, children were kind of treated coldly, very strict physical discipline. All right, spanking, getting the belt, getting in trouble. All right, but we'll see better treatment of children as the Enlightenment ideals will kind of emphasize, like maybe you can parent in a different way. Um, Ironically, Rousseau encouraged love and understanding towards children, even though he abandoned all of his. Dude. Um, we're gonna see some new patterns after. We're gonna see a little bit of change after the 1750s. All right, with the growth of the cottage industry, and I'm gonna talk about that. People working in homes, and they are gonna be making a whole bunch of clothes and textiles. That's gonna be the first industry in England to industrialize. We're gonna see an increased income and higher rates of people uh, throughout Europe, especially in the West, continuing to marry for love as opposed to just economic reasons. Now, I made an interesting note that remember when we discussed Protestantism and Martin Luther and how Protestants viewed women, that was just in Protestant communities. We're going to see this kind of take shape in marriage for love now on a more macro, higher level throughout Europe during the 1700s. But remember, it first started in Protestant communities, okay? And this isn't during the cottage industry, this in-between industry that we see in pre-industrial Europe. It's pretty much Europe getting ready to industrialize. Um, uh, with people making more money, they didn't have to wait as long to become financially independent. They don't necessarily have to marry for economic reasons. Um, and so we see marriage kind of change a little bit. People are going to marry a little bit later, all right? And we're going to see marriage patterns decline. Now, something really interesting to note is we're seeing so many new ideas and new ways of looking at the world. We're going to start seeing new ways of looking at sex. We're going to see new ways of looking at marriage stemming from the Enlightenment, okay? And with new idea, and we're going to see fewer people abstaining from premarital sex. It means that fewer people are going to start having sex before they get married, and fewer boys are going to marry the girls that they get pregnant. And those were very traditional ideas. Typically, people waited until marriage to have sex. Typically, if boys got a girl pregnant, they married them. We're going to see some of these ideas change because, well, remember, we're in the Enlightenment times, we're having new ideas, new ways of looking at the world, and so we're gonna see new ideas and traditions break down and die out. Okay, and so with fewer people abstaining from having sex, and we're gonna see more boys or fewer boys marrying the girls getting pregnant. Therefore we're gonna see more illegitimate kids. Okay, and we're seeing a breakdown of parental and village traditions. Well, we're going to see some mobility. We're going to see people moving around, especially from the farm to the factory with the Industrial Revolution, and we're going to see people traditions break down as new ideas, flow, and new traditions from the Enlightenment kind of flow out throughout Europe. All right, I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to continue part 2 after. I'm already at 15 minutes. Woo!